Hello, you're listening to the K-12 Tech Podcast, bringing you insights into the world of education technology. Stay tuned as we discuss the past, the present, and most importantly, the future of technology in our schools. Thanks everybody for joining the K-12 Tech Podcast. Really excited about the topic today. The switch from being completely Apple iPad at the student level going to Chromebooks and looking into the costs and just that overall process and decision making. So real quick, Mark, can you introduce yourself and, what your kind of work history is like?
My name is Mark Washington. I'm Director of Technology for Zeeland Public Schools in Michigan. We're about 20 minutes west of Grand Rapids. We have about 6,500 students in the district, 1,000 staff members. We currently have about 5,500 Chromebooks, almost 2,000 iPads. And we've been at this a long time. My background is I've been in technology education for about the last 31 years. The first job I had was on the east side of the state, working for an intermediate school district, doing software development for transportation routing. I've been a director of technology for 29 years in Michigan. So I'm an old man. You can cut me in half and count the rings. So I've been at this a bit. Still love it every day. Still have a passion for what I do. I have a great staff that works for us. And we've got a very supportive district who the members of the community have always supported technology fully. So we're in a good spot here in Zeeland.
Yeah, and something you had mentioned previously is that you said you were one of the oldest Apple one-to-one schools. Can you kind of elaborate on what that is, what that was?
About 8 years ago, the school district got bond funding for technology integration. And one of the challenges that we had is to try to figure out what we wanted to get. And there's lots of different items that were out there, but none of them were really great except for the Apple iPad. And so it was the one device that was personal, that it could be integrated with a variety of platforms what the kids were going to use. And it was a good fit at the time. So 8 years ago, the school district decided that they were going to go all in. They funded 7,000 iPads at once for a K-12 deployment across the board. One of the first ones in the state of Michigan in the Midwest to go all in one-to-one, truly. Other places had done one-to-one at one grade level, whether it was high school or middle school or either elementary, and then the high school, middle school is Windows. But we decided with Zeeland that it was important to go all in. If you're going to do something at one grade level, it was important to carry it all the way through for vertical articulation. So years later, we're still at that. We were a one-to-one district. We were the bell cow in Michigan. If people want to know how to deploy Apple product, they want to know how to deploy iPads in a large scale, they would come to us. People used to pay $100 to come in and look at our setup and situation just because we had that many guests coming in here on rotation. And we're happy to share. It took a lot of time to do that, but we're always happy to share. So it's a good situation. We've made some recent changes that we'll probably talk about a little bit later on today, but that's really where we came from.
Now, was this an MDM? Was this an MDM phase, or was this like Apple configurator carts and you did that with 7,000 devices? Like, what did this actually work?
Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. It was a lot of work because at the time when you first got them, you had that Apple configurator going all the way, and you also had to have the MacBooks. You had to have everything else that went with it, and we had carts for every classroom. So every classroom had their own set, and then you had to deploy them by the set.
So it is fair to call you the Henry Ford of Apple deployment because you probably created the first true assembly line.
We got desperate. It was I wasn't here at the time, but I can tell you that I hear the stories about it, and I still think the staff's a little gun shy about back then in the day. They referred to it as 8,000 backing up the truck, dumping them out. And the challenge was that we really didn't have a great professional development rollout for it. We just, at the time, it was so new. Nobody had those devices. You got to remember that at the time, iPads were a consumer device. They were never really geared for education, but it was so good that people felt that strongly about it that they wanted to get it into education. So then Apple was all of a sudden, wow, we've got a market here. We've got to catch up. So along came the configurator. Along came, you try to find how many USB hubs can I strap together to get this working off of one MacBook.
Yeah, that's interesting. You said something. It's a consumer. It was a consumer product, and iPads are still very consumer product compared to like an education Chromebook, which isn't really consumer.
Yeah,
it's more based for education. So like getting cases like in bulk, was that really difficult because you have stores selling it like one by one, do you remember kind of what that was like even to get those accessories that are just really easy to get in our market now?
Oh, back in the day, it was really tough because there's only 3 or 4 different ones. And I don't think everybody quite understood the importance of the case. Because if you remember that first case, it was the flap. It was a fold flap, and the stand that was a fold flap was so innovative. It was a cover and a flap. But eventually, as you realize that that wasn't going to be enough protection for those iPads once the kids start sliding them into backpacks and we get the backpack crush. And so the market then kind of took off, but it was really tough, especially getting the large quantities that we needed at the time we needed them. And you also have to remember too, is it was cyclical. So we would buy 7,000. So we were in a position that we had to replace 7,000 all at the same time. So, how soon after currently it's really easy when Apple comes out, they work with other manufacturers to get the case sizes right away. They give people a lot of pre-sniff on when they're coming out and what it's going to look like. But back then, it was a reaction. It was a response. So if you bought all these iPads, you thought you might have the right case, but you didn't know, but you had to have a case, or else these kids were cracking cases and shells all the time.
Well, man, I remember 8, 9, years ago when I first got started, so many of these schools, they're like, I don't want to spend $40 on a case. So they'd buy like these leather cases, the iPads, and then they would never be the same again. So it's like, if you didn't start out right, you're basically married to these things for 4 years, and you're trying to figure it out like, oh, now I got to get the right case and, all these other things. But I just thought that was interesting. Like, that's one thing that's changed is Apple has become education. So the cases are available, day one when they come out in the market.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, that was fun.
And Jeff will tell you how many cases are out there now.
Oh goodness. I mean, we enjoy going through that process, right? We get the new iPads coming in, so we get a whole host of cases that come in with them. We set our tech kids up in the hallway and we say, all right, tell us how durable they are.
Oh yeah.
And we give them those iPads that then we ship back to Zach to say, can you fix them now?
We used to have this thing where we'd pick a case that we thought was really good, and I would take it to a Board of Education meeting, and I would literally say, okay, we're going to chuck it across the room. And we would take the iPad, put in the case, toss across the room. Before it left my fingers, it felt like a home run going over Wrigley Field wall. The gasp. It was really, but again, they've come such a long way with some of the cases that they've developed and what we're trying to do with them. And again, it all comes back to Apple has been very responsive to working with vendors to make sure that they're supporting product around the core, around that iPad itself.
Yeah. And, I love the history there, specifically where you got started. And, we talked before we even started recording just about how, you are still very much, you really love what Apple is doing. But, the hot topic, right, is you went from being full iPad to mostly Chromebook, it sounds like 5,000, 2,000, going to a touch Chromebook. And kind of what I want to hear is, you said it was a pretty long process. What was that process? Because for some people, I'd be like, oh, tons of people have done that, Apple to Chromebook. But really, in the last, I want to say 3 years, I haven't heard of too many schools making the move from Apple to Chromebook.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of schools actually moving back now that they're able to get a pretty decent keyboard case for the iPad. So just walk me through what even prompted that, and then just that whole process start to finish.
We had every few years or so, in order to fund schools and technology, most districts in Michigan have to go for a school bond, and they have to ask community for the funding to do this. So that's how they fund these large implementations of their devices. About 2.5 to 3 years ago, the district decided that we were going to go for an enhancement millage, a 10-year ongoing funding source for technology integration and other things in the school district. We liked that model better because using bond funds to pay for technology, it's kind of like mortgaging a car. It's a 30-year payment for a 5-year product. So using bond funds wasn't worth it. So we decided to go with a model that encouraged us to use these enhancement funds. And so we had to decide what we wanted to do. So every 3 to 5 years, we start a process of reevaluating what's out there. So if you look at 8 to 10 years ago, what was out there, you had Kindles, you had iPads, which were just getting started. You had the Surface device. You had these big, thick Windows laptops that were tough to make individual for kids. So really, it came back down to iPads being the right thing for us to do. Fast forward to our recent update, we sit together a committee with representation across the board. There's about 18 to 20 people on this educational committee for device selection, and we start the process. And it starts off by, are we happy with what we have? Do we need to change? What do we like? What do we not like? So we put up the whole chart, and make those evaluation differences. At that point, we get staff together and we get in about 25 to 30 different devices that are currently out there, whether it's Chrome or it's iPad, and we put them in the hands of these committee members. We ask them, take them back, try them out, see what you feel, see what you like. And again, we eventually whittle it down to the top 3 or 4 devices in the mix, always looking at how it integrates with our curriculum, how it ties into what we're trying to get done academically. What's the best outcome for kids? If it doesn't work for kids, it doesn't work at all. And so we really took the time to do that. And that's about a 12-month process ahead of time. Before you even think about writing a check or making the selection or making a conversion, you have to make sure your academic ducks are in a row, because one of our teams is the chicks and one of our teams is the ducks. So this is what we do.
So I've got a question on that, Mark, real quick. How did you choose your committee? Are they teachers? Are they administrative? And then was this their only function in that committee, or were there other technology functions?
No. This was the task force. If you want to get very specific about it, we thought about bringing on our academic committees, but this became a task force. We really wanted to have the one focus to bring this committee for just this exclusive decision to make, and then we dissipate the committee at the end of it. So we had people that were somewhat interested in technology. We also had people that were building reps. We also had people that didn't like technology at all. They were just there because, you know what, we just needed that other couple of voices in there to say, is this a practical application of what we're trying to get done? So we had it all over the gamut. This was not, I love technology 100%. These were professional educators that were really good across the board, and they all did different things. And so we had a couple of building principals, but mostly it was the instructional staff with representation from each building. We also added a couple special education staff members to the committee, and the superintendent showed up every now and again.
Yeah. So what was interesting about what you just said is you started at 12 months, prior, and you're test driving these devices. One of the questions I had is typically within that 12-month window, a newer model is released. So are you basically saying we know that we like this model and we assume we're going to like the new model that's coming out, or were you able to get a model that far in advance?
One of the things that we found that the teaching staff was really interested in having, if there was going to be a conversion, so it'd be apple to apples, we had to make sure that we got them Chromebooks that were touchscreens. So once we determined the touchscreen was the important platform because the kids were used to that, we really didn't focus in on brand, manufacturer, or the intricacies of the devices. We want a philosophical difference of, is Apple the right product, or is a Chromebook the right product? Once we made that determination, then we can get granular with the specific device. And that was more or less on the technology department to go through and run those iterations to make sure that it was the right device. But for the most part, it came down to, is the iPad platform best or is the Chromebook platform best? And we made a determination off of some key criteria on what was important. That's what we decided. So.
And I know the question Jeff is going to ask, so I'll let him, but what were the key criteria? Like what were this is this and this is this? Can you give us the pros and cons?
Jeff, do you want to go first, or do you want me to keep going? It's up to you. Because I want to hear from you, man. I want your perspective.
I've been restless waiting for this conversation. So I'll tell you what. Why don't you go ahead and knock that question out? I may have some follow-ups here.
Sure. So at the time, when some of the challenges that we had with Apple was the initial cost. When you looked at a Chromebook back in the day, now this is all pre-pandemic, so you have to remember that the cost analysis, we can talk about that down the road, but the cost analysis was completely different now than it is with prior to. You're talking about Chromebook costs currently have gone up almost 100, $125 a Chromebook, and availability has always been tough too. So we were concerned about the fact that it was a consumer device, that we were trying to get it forced into adopt it with technology, the repair times that we were running into because of fixing the screens and all those different things, because we didn't have a great vendor like you guys to work with to get the repairs done as fast as we'd like them to. That was a challenge. We were at 4 to 5, 6 days to get a turnaround time to get these devices back in kids' hands. The rest of the district was a Windows-based application as opposed to being in the Apple Mac ecosystem. And I think that also played a role into it. It made things a little bit more open for us to choose. If we were all Mac or all Apple or all iPad, then that ecosystem would make more sense in that case. From an affordability standpoint, even with the buyback and even with the residual value of the devices, we found that it was still a better move for us to stay with the Chromebook. We sent out a survey to staff, and we have 400 staff members, and we got responses back from about 205 of them. And so we sent out about a 15-page survey of every single staff member in the district was given an opportunity to contribute. What staff really liked was they loved that keyboard platform that was available, built into the system. It wasn't an extra case because we felt like the kids would want to take the cases off. The first thing that kids like to do with cases, anything that flops around or in a backpack, if it has the option to come off, they would take it off. And then we ran into the problem with, okay, so if they took it off, would some of them have the keyboard and some of them not have the keyboard? So it wasn't consistently deployed. So, we spend $100 on a keyboard times 6,500 kids, that got to be a pretty big number. And so even if we whittle it down to fewer kids could choose to get a keyboard, then the teaching staff was like, well, it's not consistent. They couldn't say everybody do this. And that was a concern for them. The folded case, they loved the clamshell case for protection and durability. They liked that. The assessments on the Chrome platform felt like that they were better than they were on the iPad. They had more screen real estate to work with as opposed to the keyboards. We did go with the 11-inch as opposed to the 14-inch, but they still like that. Staff liked the single sign-on functionality of Chrome. Once you logged into that Chromebook, you got all the SSO functionality from all these other websites you got tied into, including Clever and these other applications that we were using pretty extensively. So those are some of the bigger things that we went with. And at the tail end, we never told anybody how much stuff cost. I mean, they generally could have figured it out if they wanted to, but at the time, our multiplier was $100 less per device that we could spend elsewhere in the district.
I think so. It's an interesting journey, right? I think that obviously staff buy-in is critical. If you don't get staff buy-in through the process, you've got really expensive paperweights getting crushed at the bottom of lockers, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, how do we turn this around? I think obviously bringing in a committee, having them all engaged right up front makes a whole lot of sense. Where I'm at is I'm wondering how on earth with those many, like first of all, what grade levels have your Chromebooks? Because you said you still have about 2,000 iPads sitting in your environment somewhere. What are those iPads doing and what are these Chromebooks doing?
So the Chromebooks we deployed, so when we got the committee together, we asked them what they wanted. And our only stipulation was we have to do things somewhat together. We could not do 6 classes at 6th grade was going to be Chromebooks and 6 classes at the other 6th grade building was going to be MacBooks or iPads. That wasn't going to work. So the committee decided individually. We broke up the committee. It was kind of interesting how we set the meeting. We got the meeting together. We had the high school people who got out early after school. They met for about 45 minutes before. Then we had a joint meeting with the elementary school people who got out later in the day. So we had a crossover meeting between the two. And then the high school people left, and then we had the elementary people stay for the remaining 45 minutes of the meeting. And so they were able to talk about more things that were relevant to each other in those 45 minutes at the front and 45 minutes at the back. So that worked out well. So what we found is that the elementary people, what was important to them was the applications, the touchscreen, the integration that the iPad provided at that grade level. So right now, pre-K to 2 is all iPad in our district. We gave those teachers that option, and that's what we went with. So we are working with them. It's like, even if they're in the same building as the rest of these Chromebooks, grades 3 through 12 are Chromebooks, and grades pre-K to 2 are iPads. And it's worked well. I mean, we've had some good success with that.
So those are definitely such different grade levels. I would agree that when you go about, this process, if you think that you can just take a group of educators, put them in a room and get consensus, it is not going to happen because those littles have such different needs than your middle grade kids or your high schoolers. And I think the wisdom of giving them those chunks of time to collaborate together and ultimately decide on the device is hands down, an absolute truth when it comes to, picking and selecting a device that's going to work for folks. So that was going to be one of my questions was, how do you manage Chromebooks with the smallest of the kids, right? Because when you're in that environment and you've got the littles that are having to carry these things back and forth, open them and not break them, keep the keys all intact, that kind of answers that part of the question for me. Let's get into the economics a little bit, right? Because even pre-pandemic, I'll tell you, I'm going to push back a little bit. I did an analysis myself, but you know what? Maybe I'm wrong, right? So it's recorded. It'll be public. We can put it everywhere that I was wrong. When I did the analysis, I kept coming up with, Chromebooks, because of their predicted longevity would be more expensive over the course of time than iPads. We felt that we would have to cycle out Chromebooks anywhere between every 3 and 4 years. We felt that with iPads, we could push those to 5 years pretty comfortably, given the stats, and recoup some of that investment. Talk to me about your strategy for the life cycle and how that kind of factors into your long-term cost.
And real quick, before we answer that question too, Jeff, when you're looking at the iPads, were you looking at it with like a Logitech or a high-end keyboard case, or were you just doing a touch Chromebook iPad comparison? Because that was where it did the shift for me on the cost benefit analysis.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I mean, the breakdown, even for, so I do a little bit of consulting on the side, even for a current client that I'm working with, we're specking out just for 200, right? They're a small elementary school. They got 200 kids. We were guessing that, even if they went with a non-touch screen, so $200 non-touch screen Chromebook, right? And we broke down that cost analysis over 4 years. The iPad and the Chromebook were within $4 of each other.
It wasn't a cost thing. It really wasn't. You can save some money. I think you can save a little bit more than $4 over the total life expectancy of the Chromebook, with the assumption that you are pushing those iPads out further and further. One of the challenges is that when you work on a 4 to 5, when you work on that 4th year iPad, back in the day, you got to remember, Apple was obsolescing these devices based on OS. So it stretched it out further now than what they used to stretch it out for. The flip on those things are about between 4 years, like right about 4, they wouldn't update the OS, and therefore the applications wouldn't update. So that was one of our challenges that we faced, and we didn't know, and Apple would never tell you when the hammer of the next iOS update was going to hit or not hit. You thought it would be in October every year, but there was no written law about that.
Oh, you're speaking truth there. You also don't know when they're going to give you a new one, so you can buy them, and tomorrow they give you the latest and greatest. So that is
my thought is that let's take all that out of the mix. Let's look at every kid. I believe, I've been at this a long time. I'm trying to budget out at $100 per kid per year for their tech. That's the flat number, regardless of device, regardless of what it is. If you want to get to a 1-to-1 program, put yourself away $100 per pupil every year. If you do that, and then you look at the numbers with the residual value, and you fall within that $100 range, you can choose whatever device you want. What we found is that with the Apple, a good keyboard, with the touchscreen, compared to a iPad compared to a Chromebook touchscreen, we felt like, because all things were equal, we were saving about $20 to $25 a device, top end. I mean, it wasn't a huge thing. Here's where the kicker was started, though. You got to remember, if you are a district that didn't have iPads at all, the teachers never had touch. So you could go with a non-touch Chromebook device at that $200 mark. At that $200 mark, now you're talking about something that's really an affordable device where you will see a cost differential. We decided that the touchscreen was that important. If they were going to switch over, we wanted the teachers to have buy-in. So to give them a non-touch device after having a touch device for 8 years, we had some people that were Charlton Heston at the NRA convention from my cold, dead hand. So it was, it was a no-brainer for us. And so once we decided that we were going to go with touch, because they already had it, and the cost differential budget-wise was not that much more, and we saved a little bit of money, it wasn't a ton, it was worth it. It was the better, but the teachers chose themselves. Oddly enough, I was the only tech guy in the room. It wasn't my department in the room, and it wasn't the entire district's tech staff in the room going, Chromebooks. It wasn't that. It was the teachers made this decision, driven by staff, driven by instruction, and we didn't care about the money. We never told them how much stuff cost. So from that standpoint, from a cost standpoint, it's going to be, I'd take the fight out of everybody. $100 a kid every year, no matter what the year is, and that's what you can budget for, and that's a very plannable number.
Now help me break down that number, because I'll tell you what, I know, I'm a tech director in addition to some other things, and
hey, I'm a business guy. I'm a finance major with a math and a management minor. I'm not an educator.
School me, my friend. So where I'm at with this is I'm trying to understand. So you've got Chromebooks coming in. Help me work through some of these numbers. And I'm with you. Before, let me preface this with this, right? I'm with you that the device has to be selected ultimately for its use and not on the basis of budget.
Yep.
But I know that we got some folks out there that are thinking, how do we swing this for $100 a kid? So if you're breaking this down, tell me, what I want to kind of understand is what fits within the $100 when you're making that purchase. Is that just the Chromebook? Is that the Chromebook, the MDM, the case?
Let's keep this simple. At the time, because Apple doesn't discount anything a whole lot, an Apple iPad typically costs $294 when you buy them in bulk. They're normally priced $299, but out of the goodness of Apple's heart, they will take $5 off if you buy 5,000 iPads, okay? If you buy 5,000 iPads, they'll take $5 off per unit. If you buy 10 iPads, they'll take $5 off per unit. So that $294 is a fixed cost. A typical case that you can buy that would be a decent case, we tend to stay around that $25 to $30 range. We think that there are better cases that are out there, but we don't think that we should pay more than, at that kind of quantity, what we're looking at is $25 to $30 a case. So as a general rule for the district, we budget $325 per iPad, flat. That's all we do. There's no software cost with that. We have a program called FileWave that we use for managing a lot of other devices anyways. I didn't even include that as a cost. That's a back end deal. There's going to be some sort of configuration. Now let's go back to a Chromebook and let's look at a touchscreen. If you want to look at a touchscreen Chromebook, before the pandemic, generally speaking, a touchscreen Chromebook was going to be about $250 with the Google licensing. Okay, so that's the keyboard, the shell, the touch. That's Lenovo 300E back in the day. You're paying about $229, $230 plus $25 for licensing. So I would say at bulk, if you're buying the numbers that we were buying at, that's what it came to. Is about $250, $260. So let's just say $250 for sake and $325 for the iPad. So that's the fixed cost. The iPad at the end of 3 to 4 years is probably going to have a residual value of a grade C for selling those off. So that would be about $120 to $115 per iPad. People like buying our school iPads because we were getting them centrally updated, fixed from one company who was doing all the work. They stayed in cases. We looked at them every year because we reconfigured them every year by hand. So if it sucked, even if the teachers didn't tell us it was broken, we would touch them every year and see them, send them back to the shop and make them like new, put them back in a case. So we would get pretty good grading on that. So the residual value, like I said, $115, $120. Okay, Chromebook in the 3 years, 4 years would probably be worth about $50, I would imagine, $50 to $60. So that's where we did all the numbers, and that's what we ended up coming back to.
Perfect. So here, this might be my, not being a Chromebook guy. This might be my misunderstanding. I was under the impression licensing was annual. Is licensing not annual?
No. Google, you buy a Google license for $25 one time, and it's good for about 5 years. That's it.
Well, it's actually good for the life of the device. So
they've been extending them to 8. If you can make a Chromebook go 8 years, I would never do that. If you can make a Chromebook 8 years, you're good.
I do want to say, Mark, and whoever your Lenovo rep is, you might want to put them on blast because I have never heard of anybody getting a 300E at $220, $230. The cheapest I've ever heard is like $255, $260 in the last year.
Pre-pandemic, you got to remember, pre-pandemic, and this is Mark Washington. You get the experience. I mean, come on now.
Yeah, that's right.
We were slapping guys around. I mean, we've had long-term relationships, and you got to remember too, at the time that we were buying, we were the bell cow. We were the one-to-one district that Apple had said, this is the one you go talk to. Then all of a sudden, when we talk about needing 5,500 Chromebooks, their numbers are falling for us. Now, I'm not sure what everybody else paid, but we were getting these numbers at very aggressive. So, and I understand that. And it's a one-time deal. So we took that opportunity. We didn't want to nickel and dime this all the way through. We felt like we were in Vegas. If we're going to switch it in, all in, there's the number.
Yeah. So one thing, Mark, you said with the Google console, you guys already have FileWave, which is I'm pretty sure FileWave is a per device cost, right?
It's a per device cost. We use that for everything, though. We wanted one window to manage our Windows machines, the Chromebook inventory, all things that we had in the district. We wanted one pane of glass. So we spend about we spent $4 a device, I think, per year for that management tool for the 1,000 workstations. I think we paid like maybe 35, 40 grand for managing all the other devices that we have in the district too. So that's something to consider. Do we need to with Chrome? Not really. We don't need to, because most of that Chrome management can happen at the back end with something else.
Yep. So like Google Console, obviously, a lot of schools now will use that as their filtering. They'll use that as their like full control aspect on the Chrome side. That was one of the questions I had. How much did the ease of device control from the Google Console and then the free applications from that make the decision across like your staff members?
Part of the challenge is that it made it harder, because we have in our application portal within FileWave. So we deploy all these apps centrally with a program called FileWave on the iPad. So we have a guy at the back end that gets stuff from the Apple Store, puts it in this portal page. Teachers that want an app, they'll just go to our own internal catalog and get it. And so they lost a few apps going from Apple to Chromebook. We had to get out of the concept of apps to teach them how to do that, because basically everything on a Chromebook is either web-based or an extension, or pretty much that's what it is. There's a few apps that are out there, but most of the things that people wanted was a web page, was web-based. So we've really tried to encourage them to get to that web base, to stop saying, hey, we don't need an app. What is it that we're trying to do? So we did a crosswalk of the 15 to 30 to 40 most popular applications that we use in the district. And then we said, if you looked on your iPad for it here, this is where you find it on the Chromebook. And so that one-to-one helped out a ton. And people began to realize, well, maybe if I just Google the thing that I'm looking for, when I go to that page, it will tell me, go here to the web store, or here's the web page that you use to get it. Lexia, Seesaw, a lot of the HMH, Imagine Math, Imagine Learning, all those different applications, they're not applications. They are web pages.
And Mark, I'll be honest, what we're seeing right now is more and more, because of the transition to HTML5 and the elimination of Flash, that most of the applications, most of our vendors are ceasing updates to their applications and actually pushing us to now web links for use even on the iPad. So
absolutely, that's the biggest thing.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is the game changer, to get rid of the Flash and to get it all on board with web pages. And again, you're not dealing with managing apps. So now, instead of having an external person deliver an app to you that you choose from catalog, you're now in charge. You're now in control. So one of the things that's helped us, the one drawback, I can say this to think about too from a management standpoint, is Apple Classroom is a great tool to use to manage a classroom, and that's built in from Apple. And so we worked out really well. Google Classroom is a good organizer, but it's not a good manager. So we had to find a new product to replace Apple Classroom. So we ended up looking around. We looked at about 8 or 9 different ones. We had a small group of people, probably about 5 or 6 people, get together, and we piloted about 7 or 8 different people with 2 or 3 different applications. And once we whittled them down, because it had to work from the back end as well as the front end, and we ended up looking at a product called Bloxy. And we are using those guys to manage our Chromebooks in a way that Apple Classroom used to manage the iPads.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, Mark, there's so many innovations in the market right now in that space for both iPads and Chromebooks, that the classroom teacher that used to worry about bringing devices in and having to
set them up,
not only set them up, but like walk around and make sure that kids are on task. I mean, with these new applications, click of a button, you can eliminate the apps that are available. You can reduce it down to just what you're using during that time frame. You can do the same thing with websites, and then on top of that, you can push to them the questions that you need to ask to make sure that they're tracking with you. I mean, these tools that are available, whether it's Security's Classroom or Mosul or the application you spoke of, there's so many different options out there. It's really just more of kind of what fits your need, but there's going to be something out there that fits, that makes classroom, instruction so much more powerful with technology in your hand.
I think if you look at that from a budgetary standpoint, if you give yourself $100 a kid for the device, and then we're finding out that management piece, anywhere from $5 to $10 a kid, you will get whatever you want, and it will be more than what you need.
So one thing I wanted to say from the cost benefit side, we talked about it. With Apple, you are almost always assuming a back end value. And with Chromebook,
Yes.
Mark didn't even mention a back-end value. He's like, well, I have no idea what this is going to be worth.
It's $50 is what I budget for now at the end of these things. And here's the kicker: we sell them back to the kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's like a big point too, is let's just go a perfect example. The MacBook market just crashed this summer, just like crashed. It probably went down 20% in value. Yeah, I mean, and that's one thing I can see why some people go with Chromebooks is because they don't really worry so much about the value on the back end because they're getting that money, that value up front. So it is hard. It really is a game of risk and reward. And, either way someone goes, Apple, Chromebook, like you're right. It has everything to do with staff buy-in, everything to do with if it's good for your environment.
Does it meet your academic needs? Is it finding the way to deliver instruction that you are most comfortable with? I also have to tell you, straight up, with all the assessments that we have to do and all the measuring of student data and everything else from that platform, one thing that we're able to do is the pandemic really brought to focus a couple of things for us. One, having Chromebooks at home to manage was way easier than having iPads to remotely manage. Kids would log in, and then we could also lock the settings and make all these changes remotely on our centralized platform, and that got pushed out no matter where they were. Second, in order to get some of the teacher buy-in, we felt like once they made a decision, how do we deploy these things in a way that we can get this in front of the kids instead of not just sitting there and not being used? So one of the opportunities that we took advantage of was the fact that in the past, teachers had been using their iPads for assessments, and it was a bit of a challenge at times with the iPad compared to those that were using Chromebooks. So what we decided to do was we have these high stakes testing that we do in the state of Michigan in March and April and May. We talked to our Board of Education in October prior to that testing cycle and said, listen, for fall, because everything was in flux on how to get parts and how to get stuff, I need to be able to order 5,500 devices that we would normally order in March to get them in here by May. I need for you guys to order these in October so that we can deploy these for testing. So it got the opportunity. The teachers had already had these devices for about a year, 8 to 10 months ahead of time, but the kids hadn't had their hands on them. Once we had the testing and assessment piece necessitating the touch for the kids, that was our deployment kicker. We got everybody and all these kids to touch these things 3, 4, 5 times a week during the assessment window, and the kids got used to them. The teachers had to show them how to log in. The kids got used to them, and it was not a kid problem. It worked out great. Now, I will tell you the other thing that we did that has been beneficial is instead of selling off the entire herd of iPads and our entire fleet of iPads, every building has one set of 30 iPads that were left for an entire year. So those teachers that had heavily invested into the iPad and needed time for transition, they have that set of 30 available to them that they could actually go down, use, and then bring back for the teachers to use. So we didn't, yank everything out cold. We will get those devices back and phase those guys out sometime at the end of this coming academic year. But we wanted to make sure there was enough of a transition time for those teachers to respect the fact that they put a lot of stuff in there. For 8 years, we told them, this is our bell cow. This is what we need to do. We need to make sure that we gave them an opportunity that they could have what they needed for a period of time.
Yeah, Mark, that's like a great idea. And I've had a couple of schools that have done that. And I think it's been a wise decision, especially with like the chip shortage and everything else. Like really, I can encourage some schools with some wisdom, keep 10% of your fleet when you trade them in and keep them just as loaners or just in case. You never know what's going to happen.
Floaters when things break.
Yeah, you've already paid the money for them. You already have them enrolled in your system. You already know the devices. Keep 10% so that you've got a backup plan in case something happens. Because I got an email the other day and there's issues with the power grid in China, and they're saying it's going to be another delay in the chip shortage. So it's one of those things. I just think that's a really smart plan, is to actually keep some of those older devices. Just keep them just so you have them as a reserve, or even, just to back up your teachers throughout the year.
One of the other things that we've done is also self-insured. We've decided that we're going to try and fix them in-house as best we can. We've just rolling that out this year to see how it goes. But we want to really make sure that our staff gets a response time that meets their needs. Staff cannot wait to have devices that don't work in front of the kid. If you got 29 kids with a device and one that doesn't have one to work, if it takes longer than 2 business days, I'm not happy about that. We got to get that going.
Yep. One question I had, Mark, are you guys Outlook on your email, or are you
We are
guys
all Google all the time.
Perfect. Okay. I just want to make
All
sure I
Google.
didn't, I'm
All
sure that
Google.
has some sort of like to play in
Not what's that other company?
that. Outlook? Oh, who's ever heard of that?
It's not
Yeah.
Google. No, it's all we're all Apple, or excuse me, we're all Google all the time. We've been a Google shop for a very long time. It's worked out well. I think that I think we can't keep chasing the shiniest ball that's out there. We have to be consistent. So one of the things that we've done in Zeeland is to be more consistent about how we deploy things. We want to give staff well enough time that they can be ahead of the game, where there's no surprises coming down the road. Now, that's not to say that there's no bumps in the road, but we really want to try to encourage our staff to have what they need, to see what's always coming, to make it predictable. We try to tell them. My previous superintendent, who was here at the time, had a philosophy of ready, aim, 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 and then fire. Sometimes we get in front of it, we ready, fire, aim in schools, and then we miss, and then we spend a lot of time backtracking. So our next big phase is integration. How do we properly integrate these devices? How do we get these things on board into the hands of the kids where they become more an integrated device? I personally believe that when technology becomes personal, it becomes proficient. So we really want to make these devices personal to the kids so that they can actually use these things. Now, from grades 3 to 5, they don't go home. They stay in carts in the classrooms. 6 to 12, they go home. And in fact, we let the 6 to 12 kids take them home this summer. We didn't check them back in. We let those kids take those devices home in the summertime. Great decision, no problems. Some people freak out, like, you're going to let them keep it? They're going to pay insurance on it, and we're going to bill them if it breaks, so why not?
Yep. It's a double-edged sword, because we do a lot of, that's when we get smashed. So it used to be that it's actually pretty common now for students to take the devices home. But what we're seeing is the initial huge hit we would get, in end of June, July, and August, we're now getting smashed, end of August, September, when the devices come back. And the biggest thing we tell schools is just make sure you teach them how to do battery cycles, how to actually turn your device off and make sure they're keeping it charged.
Don't
the biggest thing to see. Exactly. Because what it'll do is it'll get that battery to like, it's, I know it doesn't make any sense, but like below zero, where it can't charge back up. Kind of like when you have a bad car battery. So we just tell schools, make sure you teach people, turn your device off. It's going to sit. You're not going to use it over the summer. This is how you power cycle, stuff like that. But this is the question everybody wants to know, Mark. You're not that long into it. I don't know when was the first day the Chromebooks came in, but are you happy with your decision?
Yeah. No. I'm not even going to beat around the bush. It's been great. It's been if you ask the teaching, again, there's those teaching staff that really like the Apple platform, and they're going to like that platform. But in general, I think our staff has been very receptive. I have not heard a ton of people complaining about things and how they regret going to the iPad or regret going to the Chromebooks. One of the big challenges that we do have, again, is that app concept management differential between what they have on the iPad for an app versus what they have available on the Chromebook. But for the most part, I think I read an article once that the average person only goes to 8 websites in general. Anything beyond those 8 websites is just like, you're just killing time. We find that there's a series of core applications that those teachers use. As long as we can make sure that those core applications are being used properly and available and workable, then our staff is really, they're finding that it does the Chromebook does what they want it to do. And in fact, they love the keyboard. I ask the kids in general too. My office is inside of a high school. My physical office that runs the entire district is inside of a high school. In order for me to get a drink of water in the water fountains, when we used to could drink out of the water fountains, I could go and there would be kids all the way out there. If you ask the kids, I would take a Chromebook and an iPad, set it on the table and ask them, which one do you like? Chromebook, iPad, Chromebook. 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 kids were all Chromebook. So I don't think that there's been a regret about that. I think our staff likes it. I think the big thing was for us is because we had iPads, touchscreen matters. I think we didn't go cheap on the iPad, or excuse me, cheap on the Chromebook. You can get a very popular branded but non-ruggedized device. I would highly encourage you to get the ruggedized device, no matter what the manufacturer is. Get that harder shell. If you don't, if you can take your fingers and put it on the back of that device and you can see your little fingerprints on the front side of that screen from that touch, that's a bad back to get. Go ahead and spend the money on the ruggedized device. You will not regret it. Screen cracks are about 130, 150 bucks to get replaced.
Yep.
And touchscreens are even more.
Yep. Well, Jeff, you coming from full Apple, you guys both can kind of, share that relationship of what that's like. I'm kind of curious, what are some final questions you have for Mark as we kind of hop off, on this podcast?
Well, so I think, one of the questions that would be out there is, how do you see the Chromebook market evolving over time? Because I know that when it first launched, it felt like there were really a significant amount of restrictions as to what kids could do on a Chromebook. How is that today, and how do you see that evolving in the future?
We're, right now, to be honest with you, we're looking at potentially putting staff. We currently have a bunch of our staff. They have the HP Windows 10/11 devices. We're looking at buying 14-inch Chromebooks for some of the staff that we have to see how that works. I think it's getting better. I think that there are very few things, unless it's a specific application that I need to run in Windows, that I can't do on a Chromebook. At home, I use a Chromebook primarily as my personal device. I have one in my backpack that I carry to fix network problems and to meet with staff presentations. So I do think that the performance is there. I think that you need to set a budget, and you will find a device that meets your budget within that particular performance range. I would say 14-inch, I think it's going to be the way to go. I'm not necessarily, and I'm going to get in trouble for this with teaching staff in here, I'm not necessarily sold on the touchscreen, to be honest with you, on the Chromebook. I think that we had the touch because we had it with the iPads, but the kids, I think the benefit of having that big screen, if I had a choice between touch and a 14-inch screen, I would go with the 14-inch screen for the Chromebook as opposed to the touch, to be honest with you. Now, that's my personal preference. We haven't run that through a committee, but if we're just having that conversation, I think that would be worthwhile looking at.
That's great.
Go ahead.
Great insight for folks that are going through and thinking about, how to go about, making this decision, because you're right. I mean, the older that students get, the less you need the device to be as intuitive, right? The younger kids, touchscreen matters a great deal,
yes,
right? And that's kind of why you're maybe still at iPads at the youngest grades, but even in maybe grades 3, 4, maybe up to 5, having that kind of intuitive interaction with the device might matter. But I tend to agree with you. As you get older, it's something that is maybe a nicety, but it's not a necessity. And what is a necessity as kids get older is being able to dual screen things, right? Or side by side things, I guess I should say. And having the ability to do that on a 14-inch screen is far superior to an 11-inch. So it's good insight.
I would add one thing, just as a quick thing. Don't underestimate the devices the kids have in their pockets. And in the Google platform, here's why it matters. The Chromebook camera is not nearly as good as the iPad camera at all. I will tell you that. There's no way that it's going to be better. So what we're finding is that the kids are actually using their phones with Google on them to connect to the Wi-Fi. They're taking all their pictures and everything else with their phones. They are doing all their video editing and video capture with their phones. And then as soon as they go into their Chromebook with Google, it's right there because of the Google Photos sync. So we really undervalued that resource that the kids are already coming with, that the district, quite frankly, didn't have to pay for. It's natural to them. And I promise you this much, a kid will never come to school without their phone being charged. They may forget about that Chromebook being charged. They might forget about that iPad being charged, but there's no way they're coming to school without that hot friend they have in their pocket.
That's very interesting. And kind of what you said about the 14-inch Chromebook versus the touch or the 2-in-1. I have a Lenovo Yoga Windows-based laptop.
Yeah.
I have it for government use or whatever. But it's I can't remember the last time I used touch on it. I even have a stylus. I can't remember the last time I used the stylus. It really, I'm just using my keyboard. And what Jeff said's right. Having the dual screens or dual comparison is what's important to me. And that's interesting. I wonder if that's how that's going to change. Maybe it's going to be a mix. Maybe it's iPads at K through 3. And then maybe it's touch Chromebook 2-in-1s, 4 through 6, 4 through 7. And then maybe it's the 14-inch Chromebooks in the high school. Who knows? Who knows what the good mix is?
I'm curious about my second grade. That's what I'm really curious to see next year. They've had Chromebooks at third grade. They have iPads pre-K to 2. That second grade class is right at that tipping point where what should I do? So I'll be curious to find out what those staff members are doing when they have the iPads in their rooms and they're seeing what the other kids are doing in the rest of the building. That I'm looking forward to those meetings, and we're going to have those conversations. We're always up for that.
Yeah. Now, I think an important thing as we near the end of this to bring up, since you're a finance guy, Mark, is how do these numbers break down? So I've been kind of modifying this based on what I'm learning as I go through. Admittedly, was a little bit of a Chromebook rookie. Thought that licensing fee for Chrome just kind of tracked with them. Glad that it doesn't. So here's my breakdown. We got a Chromebook. We're not getting the Mark Washington discount. That seems pretty incredible.
Well, now you're not. Now you're not. You can't.
Well,
yeah.
I'm gonna still stay a little bit pre-pandemic, or you can give me a number and I can plug it in.
$279.
Okay, $279.
You can get a touch Chromebook with Google Console for $270 right now.
270s are number.
Let's just say 300. Let's just say 300 Google Console everything.
Now here's where we can prove out the wisdom of Mark and that this podcast has such value, because here's our breakdown, right? Our Chromebook is $270.
Yeah.
Our MDM is $7 a year. The case is $25-ish. Does that sound fair to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. And then insurance is also $25 annually. So they smash it, you send it off, they fix it, they send it back to you. If we take all of that into account for a population of, it doesn't really matter how many kids, I put 200 into my model, our cost that comes out for a 4-year cycle is $101. So
it's like almost dead on.
Pretty favorable, right? Hits that $100 mark.
32
you got
years.
Everything you need.
I've been at this.
Now, here's your iPad, right? So the iPad, it really, what makes a big difference is whether or not you take that expensive keyboard case and pair it with it. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to pair it with it.
Sure.
We're going to go with the extreme discount that Apple offers for bulk purchases of $294. And then add the MDM in at an equal amount of $7. A case at $99.98, right? Retail, I think they're $149. Yep. I think you buy them from Apple, they're $99. And then an annual insurance fee of $20. Now, when we break that down, we need kind of like we need a little bit of a drum roll here, right? If we're at 4 years, we are actually at $132 a device compared to that $101 of the Chromebook. So Mark was right. We do save a little bit of money, and if your teachers are for it, I
told you $25 was a differential.
Yeah, I believe you did.
What's your differential?
Our differential is $31. So
I'm wasting my time. I should be in Vegas right now.
That's right. Blackjack.
Now, here's my kicker that's going to bring it just a little bit closer.
Sure.
In our system, we do push those Chromebooks or those iPads over to 5 years because they are insured for that full 5 years. So we feel pretty confident we can run them that far. And then you end with a comparison of 101 for the Chromebook and 106 for.
My only caveat against that is that we were finding that people were telling us that it's more expensive to repair iPads over time. If you can if you're going to make a recommendation, I would tell people lock in a number early for that repair cost. If you're going to pay an annualized cost for that, it will go up over time because of the age of the device.
Yeah. Yeah, and Jeff, we know this. Basically, if you do a 5-year with an iPad, MacBooks maybe not so much. 5-year with an iPad, assume you're replacing that battery. You're doing one.
A 5-year-old iPad. It's worn out, man. It's busted.
Yeah. But no, that's great math, right? It's like it kind of tells people, hey, like if you're creative, you can make a device work for your district, but it doesn't matter. The finance does matter, but ultimately you have to have it to benefit your environment.
Here's the excitement of this breakdown, right, that Mark brought to us is ultimately for all the, IT people out there and the finance people that are out there making a budget decision, right? We could continue to crunch these numbers and we could say, okay, at the 4-year mark, at the 4-year mark, you had 132 for the iPad versus 101 for the Chromebook. You factor in the resale value. You get $50 for the Chromebooks, you get $100 for the iPads. You're getting back closer to that wash, right?
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, this is a conversation that gets pushed back to those instructional leaders that are going to have to be using these every day. And that process that Mark outlined at the beginning of this is a process that really needs to be followed around the country.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, we're happy to share some of the resources that we've done in Zeeland to put things together. If you could take a quick second, one thing I would like to share with you is I can show you this screen right here. I don't know if you can see that or not. I don't know if you can see that.
Yep, we got it.
We put together what steps our device selection committee went to in terms of proposing a proposed selection. We gave this overview. I try to break down everything into one pagers for everybody. So it's a one page of what the device selection committee was going to get. This is an internal document that we sent to our staff to tell them, hey, the committee's been getting together, and this is some of the things that they're looking at doing. Grades 3 to 6, how are we going to address training? How are we going to address staff integration? We also put together an evaluation process to kind of give those people that are non-stakeholders directly in schools an overview as to what the process is, why we did what we did, how the staff has been involved, what every 3 to 4 years we reevaluate the different devices that are out there, how we're going to gather input, and how we're going to spend this money with next steps. So I'll be happy to put this together and send this to you guys if you want to make this part of the podcast. It's up to you. We've got probably 7, 8, 9 more. And if you want help on, if you want to see what our experience has been, I will say, we had a great group of teachers this summer get together and put together a Chromebook transition document. Fantastic resources that said, if you were an iPad person and you're looking to do the Chromebook situation, here is some things that you can look at. And these were for teachers, by teachers, with teachers, about teachers. And it worked out great. It was fantastic work. We had several of our teachers pull that together, and it's been really a solid document that people can use as a reference. The one thing in technology that we're finding is that my tech department, think of it like driver's ed versus buying a new vehicle. We're vehicle orientation. We're very good at telling you where the radio is. We're very good at telling you how to turn the windshield wipers on and all the rest of that stuff. But the driver's ed piece belongs in the instructional side of the house. And so by having the two married together, if there's a vehicle question, we're the dealership. But if you want to know how to drive the vehicle, we have our instructional people, which do a phenomenal job, and they take that interest. And together, everybody gets a good ride. So it's worked out well for us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. I think, and Jeff as well. I think this has been very informative because I feel like we did get a really good idea of both environments and both benefits. And then also really appreciate just the thought you put into it. I think a lot of people, they're just so far behind, in their departments, and they're just doing like, I'm just going to keep doing what I did last year. But it really is that preventative maintenance, that preventative, getting in front of that problem, getting in front of that new environment, and then really understanding what's going to benefit your school. And I appreciate, your passion about that and what you've done. But thank you just so much for your time. This has been so helpful. And if you can send me those documents, we'll attach them to the website and then also the podcast so people can reference those as well.
You bet. I appreciate you guys. I mean, this is a great opportunity for us to kind of to share with what other people are doing. We don't necessarily think we got it 100% right. We want to know if there's a better way that we can do this. I always walk around. These are my two favorite sticks to make fire. They've always made fire. I want to find somebody with a flamethrower. I want to find somebody with a lighter. Even though the lighter might run out of fluid every now and again, it's still a more efficient tool to make fire. So we really want to encourage this sharing of opportunities, the sharing of ideas. I think it feeds everybody's soul.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that.
Perfect. So to end, we had to bring the fact checkers in. The fact checkers found a little bit of error in the initial calculation. So when we brought that back in, we landed exactly at a $25 difference between the iPad and the Chromebook. So it dropped the iPad due to a miscalculation from, I believe we were at 131, 132, something like that. Mm-hmm. We dropped that down to exactly 125, and Mark's odds in Vegas just increased. So things are pretty good, even after you factor in the resale value.
Yep.
Of the devices, $100 for a Chromebook, $100 for the iPad, $50 for the Chromebook. The Chromebook comes out at an annual cost of $88 a year per student, and the iPad rolls in at an even $100.
Yep.
Wow.
I just want to tell people, if you take that $100 to your finance person, you could feel pretty comfortable that you're standing on pretty solid ground. The worst thing you do is go to your finance person with bad numbers, and all of a sudden you try to have that conversation. It takes you will backpedal harder than a D-back trying to get a ball going over his head. It's just not a good look.
Take it from the man. It seems like good advice. And when you break it down as a cost per student, it feels a lot more affordable.
It's budgetable and it's manageable. And then you can see how much buildings cost as opposed to how much the whole thing costs. So now you can take a phased approach for deployment.
Yep. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you guys so much. And, we'll be in touch, and maybe we'll check back in next year and see how everything's going with the environment.
For sure. Hey, you guys are welcome to come out here. And listen, we're an open book. There's no secrets here. We have to get this right for kids. If we don't get this right for kids, we're failing them. And right now, think of them as your retirement program. The better you treat them, eventually they'll keep feeding that kitty.
That's right.
$100 for the visit, or can I get a freebie?
You, my friend, I will buy the first round. You can come out here for free.
All right.
Well,
road trip.
We want to take you up on that.
Awesome.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Take care.